Interesting times, aren't we? Here in Sacramento, as we all know, we are in, maybe those of you who aren't local don't know, but we're enduring the effects of this summer's fire season, as Claudia mentioned. The air quality index at extremely high levels because of the Calder fire, which is burning just miles east of here between Pollock Pines and Lake Tahoe. This fire has already burned over 143,000 acres of forest and 469 homes, while at this point, there's another 18,000 that are potentially in harm's way. And so far, firefighters have managed to get the fire 20% contained. And this is entirely separate from the Dixie fire, which has been burning north of us since July 13th, where almost 750,000 acres, that's 1,200 square miles, have been burning. And that's around 45% contained. And in the meantime, COVID, the COVID pandemic rages on with new variants like the Delta version emerging as the virus seeks to stay alive and avoid containment. This public health crisis has been with us now for almost a year and a half. And even though our scientists have developed vaccines, we are now told that these may not be enough to return us to unrestricted social interaction. And why here we are sitting in a room, most of us vaccinated, and we're still wearing masks. And in the meantime, the number of people that are hospitalized in this county with a COVID diagnosis is crept up to 433, which is not far from the peak of 512 that we hit just before Christmas last year. So while the number of us in this county who have died of COVID or with a COVID diagnosis since March of 2020 is at a relatively low 1,900, every one of us is potentially at risk. And so everyone has something to fear in the invisible way that this virus finds its victims. Every person with whom we come in contact is a potential carrier, or so we could assume, and even our closest family, friends and family. And so many of us find it difficult to be around others without some degree of concern, if not fear. Fires and pandemics are not the only events plaguing us today. Oh no. We have the unfolding humanitarian disaster in Afghanistan, which has frightening implications not only for the suffering people of that poor country, but for all who might be victims of Islamic terrorism, as the Taliban and ISIS regain a base from which to attack others. And coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, this development is not a happy one to contemplate. And do I need to remind us of the ongoing political divisions in our own country? Well, we have an election on whether to recall our governor coming up in 2 weeks. And I could take all my time, all my remaining time, listing all the other political squabbles going on in all the other states of the Union. It's quite sobering to realize that since the end of the Cold War in 1989, 32 years ago, that our country has essentially been in a 50-50 division between right and left. That's a long time to be engaged in a frustrating stalemate. Oh, and there's more. There's always more. For the first time in decades, we are experiencing serious inflation, a matter of great concern for those of us who are retired and on fixed incomes. Managing our finances well becomes increasingly difficult when the specter of inflation looms ahead because, like fires and pandemics and political turmoil, we cannot have any way of knowing when things will stabilize and conditions become less threatening. We have no way of planning with confidence. Now, these macro circumstances are the frame within which we all navigate the problems and challenges of our own individual lives, particularly those of us dealing with the inevitable physical and psychological health trials of getting old. Some of us here are living with diagnoses of illnesses that threaten our very lives. Some of us here are living with little or no financial cushion, wondering if we'll have enough money to live as we would like to till the end of our lives. Some of us here are living alone and often experience bouts of loneliness and depression. Some of us here are living with addictions to alcohol or other substances. Now, the point I'm making is there is always something in life that can frighten us, and sometimes frighten us so powerfully that we feel paralyzed and overwhelmed, and there seems no escape. So how do we as true students, deal with the fears that can reduce us to tears and depression? Now, I ask this myself because from time to time these days, I find myself overtaken by those awful sensations of fear that show up in my gut as anxiety, show up as shortness of breath, flushing of my face, and in my mind as a runaway horror show of thoughts of catastrophe, disaster, death. And in this, I know I'm not alone. In my work with people in my anxiety group meetings, I witness their fears and anxieties. And this has led me to appreciate the truth that fear is a fundamental experience of our humanity, and one that we deal with all of our lives. I don't remember where, but I've heard it said that fear and love are the twin foundational dynamics of life. This basic dichotomy shows up, in fact, in the very first chapters of the Bible, in the creation story of Adam and Eve. They are cremated, whoa! Paging Dr. Freud. Let's try that again. They are created, remember, in the blissful environment of Eden, where nothing threatens them and everything operates in an unimaginable harmony. They walk and talk regularly with God. They have everything they could want. And life is easy and pleasant. They are surrounded by nothing but love and support. Now, we all know how it turns out, for the story suggests that this idyllic life wasn't enough for them. With all the beauty and delight that was theirs every hour of every day, they just had to have the one thing God said they couldn't. They had to have it. Remember what God told them? Don't eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because if you do, you will die. Well, since neither Adam nor Eve had a clue about what it means to die, they couldn't be afraid of this consequence. Fear had not yet been invented for them. It's only after they've done the deed that they start experiencing fear and shame and all the other emotions that we all prefer not to feel. These new and utterly foreign feelings confuse them, and for the first time they experience the sense that something is wrong. And instinctively, without thinking about it, they try to hide from God, as if this is possible. And so when Jehovah found out what they'd done, he cursed them to exile from Eden, where they will now have to live with suffering and death. And so there it is, in the very beginning, love and fear as our emotional and psychological foundations. As Adam and Eve discovered when they did that deed, fear is a natural, powerful, and primitive human emotion. It involves a universal biochemical response as well as a high individual emotional response. Fear alerts us to the presence of danger or the threat of harm, whether that danger is physical or psychological. There is, however, an essential distinction that we as true students might bear in mind as we deal with our own fears. So let's consider the following. 1, fear is a physiological, neurological reality. It's built into our bodies. It is designed to stimulate the organism to defend itself against all threats, including death. And this mechanism, therefore, is as old as life itself. In humans, fear expresses in the body as sweating, increased heart rate, extreme discomfort in the gut, high adrenaline levels that put us on full alert. So fear is an automatic, autonomic, conditioned response to threats to our well-being. But secondly, not all threats are equal. And this is where our training as true students can help us. For I would suggest that most of what causes fear in me is not an immediate actual threat, but rather the thought of a threat. And so I can apply my spiritual discipline to the task of bringing my fears into a conscious environment of divine order and love. In other words, I can't stop myself from being afraid. That's built into my body, but I can change my thoughts about my experience. Now, recently, a good friend of mine received a diagnosis of colon cancer. And when I heard the news, my first reaction was fear. I felt my stomach clench. Tears came into my eyes. My heart started beating faster, and I could feel my entire body shift into a fight or flight mode. Now, the information came to me through a mutual friend who only had a brief text from our buddy, so I knew nothing of the actual situation he was facing, nor of the prognosis for healing. I just felt scared. Now, this is an example of how thoughts can generate fear. Although I was not in any danger whatsoever for myself when I heard the news, although I did not just receive a cancer diagnosis, my body reacted as if I had. This is because our imaginations are so powerful that they can essentially bring into our experience conditions that are not, in fact, present. Claudia led us to the garden in our meditation. I felt myself physically in the garden, although I was just sitting in that chair in this room. And our nervous system is so integrated into our minds, where imagination is activated, that our bodies can react as if what we are simply imagining is actually right there before our eyes. So after I got that news about my friend, my spiritual training helped me recognize that the fear I was feeling, it was real, was entirely a manifestation of my imagining my friend dying from this cancer. And making this distinction helped pull me out of the fear so I could move to imagining what I could do to help my friend. The same faculty of imagination that just moments before had produced this terrible feeling of fear and paralysis now came to help me to outpicture reaching out to my friend and asking him what I could do to support him. So when I changed my thoughts, my emotional state also shifted. The adrenaline subsided, and feelings of compassion and love began to presence themselves. Whereas a few moments earlier, I was so overcome by fear that I was of no help to either my friend or myself, I now felt myself moving toward empathy and care. Now, yesterday I spoke with my friend and his wife, who are also true students, and was impressed to find them both in a state of peace and calm. He's scheduled for surgery in a couple of weeks and has to go through all the sometimes uncomfortable things needed to prepare. But he has made a commitment to himself to make friends with his new situation, to see in his cancer diagnosis an opportunity to go deeper into himself and his relationship with God. He said to me, "I know I have little power to deal with the physical condition, but I trust God to see me through every step of the way." He also said that over the course of the last week since the diagnosis, a couple of times he's found himself gripped by a fear of dying. And rather than resisting or trying to change the subject, he determined to feel the fear, to go into it, to befriend and learn from it. Obviously, he said, "I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm committing to taking it one day at a time. And I've already had all sorts of people rally to my side, and I feel strengthened by the love that's been coming my way." Now, consider, in a way, most of the fear that my friend has been going through is a product of his imagination, imagining the worst, imagining things that have not actually happened. Cancer is one of those words, like pandemic or forest fire or inflation, that carries with them a bookshelf full of terrifying stories. We just need to hear those words once, and a whole range of scary thoughts can come flooding into our minds. This too is natural if unlinked to our actual experience in the moment. But this brave and powerful man is aware of how the mind works, and he's applying his spiritual tools to letting God help him handle it. And his beautiful and gifted wife is bringing her spiritual maturity to the situation as well. I said earlier that love and fear are the twin foundational dynamics of life. And I interpret this to mean that fear is not just the warning of danger, but more importantly for us and for our spiritual practice, it's the reminder to turn to love. When I'm scared, the only known antidote is love. Love is the promise of safety and protection. Love is the shelter from the storm. It's the balm of Gilead. Love says, as Jehovah does in the 41st chapter of Isaiah, "Fear not, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my right hand. Now, of course, it requires great spiritual discipline to resist the sometimes overwhelming force of the emotional storms that fear can call forth. I know from my own experience how powerful fear can be, how completely it can seem to occupy both my body and my mind and drag me down into a pit of darkness and despair. Few things are as anguishing as the feeling of powerlessness in the face of an invisible threat. But it is in our spiritual inheritance to also call forth the loving presence that does have the power to bring us through the storm to the other side. We have the power to call upon the God of our being to help us conquer our fears with the unconditional love and security of his divine presence. Now, Jesus himself tells us that we have this power. In the 8th chapter of Matthew, we read the story. Many of us know this. This is the story. Then he, this is Jesus, he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. And suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. His disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." He replied, "Ye of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up, rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Our fears, Jesus is telling us, derive from our inability to believe in the indwelling Christ's presence. But that's okay. He loved these men even though they had not yet developed the consciousness that would have allowed them to rebuke the winds and the waves. And so he did it for them. And what happened, as the story concludes? It was completely calm. The peace that passes understanding, as Claudia acknowledged in her meditation, the peace that passes understanding comes through and not in spite of our fears. Fear is the reminder to turn to the divine that is always waiting within to calm the storms of our lives, to inform our understanding that divine order is present, even in the most trying of circumstances, to love us even when we are in despair and terror. Peace, wonderful peace, comes to us through the Father within. When we remember to ask for it, this wonderful peace sweeps over our spirits forever in fathomless billows of love. Now, this is a great mystery to the rational mind, no doubt, but we have only to do the work, discipline the mind, let go and let God, to experience this peace that passes understanding. What's causing you to be afraid today? A real threat or something the mind is imagining? Either way, let's let our fears be the doorway to God's infinite love and peace right here, right now. I surrender my fears to the loving God within, and peace is present in me now. I surrender my fears to the loving God within, and peace is present in me now. We can use this affirmation whenever anything brings us fear, depression, fright. For the God is within us, just like Jesus was with the disciples in that boat. All we have to do is awaken the Christ within, and calm will be restored. Then, to celebrate this as true, to experience this truth for ourselves, I'd like us to seal the deal in song and invite us to turn to hymn number 201, Peace, Peace, Wonderful Peace. And shall we stand?